Exodus chapter 6, verses 14 through 30, and chapter 7. What we have here is Moses and Aaron's credentials are established, and then we encounter the first two battles of the Lord against the gods. What we have before us in these verses is a short genealogy, and I'm not going to read all this. I will leave it to you to read at your leisure, and what we do is just look here at some of the high points. What we have first of all is when it says here, heads here in verse 14, what that means is the chiefs of the clans. They don't have households referred to, so it would be the chiefs of their fathers' clans. That's what's going on. Now, the main point of this genealogy, as you can see what I've written, is to show that Moses and Aaron are from the tribe of Levi, and furthermore, that they are of the clan of Levi's son Kohath. From him, through Aaron, came the lineage of the high priest. This is important because it establishes Moses and Aaron's credentials here. One of Kohath's descendants, it's a different Amram. You'll see there's two Amrams listed, and they're not the same guy. The later one married his aunt Jochebed, which means Jehovah is glory. And they had three children, Miriam, Aaron, and Moses. Now, this second Amram lived for 137 years, we're told. And then there's a little bit more effort by Moses in writing Exodus. He gives us a little bit more of the lineage here. Aaron's son Eleazar, and then has a son, and that makes Aaron's grandson Phinehas, are also mentioned here to show continuity in this line. Verse 26, it was the same Aaron and Moses to whom the Lord said, "Bring out the sons of Israel from the land of Egypt according to their hosts." They were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the sons of Israel from Egypt. It was the same Moses and Aaron. Now it came about on the day when the Lord spake to Moses in the land of Egypt, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "I am the Lord, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I speak to you." But Moses said before the Lord, "Behold, I am unskilled in speech. How then will Pharaoh listen to me?" Okay, God, that's Jehovah here, tells Moses, his name is Moshe, to meet with Pharaoh again. So what happens? Moses starts complaining again that he's not able to speak well, he's unskilled in speech, and he asks why Pharaoh would even bother to listen to him since he doesn't know how, or so he claims, to speak in proper diplomatic language. What I believe here, and what some of the commentators I was looking at believe, is that Moses is showing here still a lingering lack of faith in Jehovah, that he's really in charge and going to take care of all this. And it's probably due to what we would now say that Moses had a little bit of an inferiority complex. He felt inadequate to serve the Lord. The truth is that Moses was inadequate to do the Lord's work, and so are we. God doesn't choose us to do things for him because we're special. He chooses us so that he can get all the glory. God says to us, it's not about you. It's about me, God, getting my work done. As you've heard me say before, God gets the glory and we get the blessing. Now we go to chapter 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, "See, I make you as God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh, and he let the sons of Israel go out of the land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not listen to you, then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring out my hosts, my people, the sons of Israel, from the land of Egypt by great judgments." Now we see here these verses are actually a continuation of the dialogue in chapter 6, so they really shouldn't be separated into another chapter here. Now, the Lord tells Moses that he'll make him a god, that's Elohim here in this case, to Pharaoh, and that Aaron will be his Navi, his prophet. This doesn't surprise Pharaoh because as he was considered a god to the Egyptians, he viewed Moses as saying that Moses, was a god too, like Pharaoh. So, all right. God did not say that, however. He said that Pharaoh would come to see Moses as God over him, and this gave Moses a confidence that he had lacked. God's trying to build Moses' confidence here. He's just struggling with this. He had spent 40 years in the wilderness, and now he feels he's a complete nobody, which was perfect for God because he wants someone he can work with who will just trust him and not trust into his own strength and skills. Okay. The Lord says also that he will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will reject Moses' demand. Moses, just be ready for it. He's going to reject you. We know that ahead of time. Now, what does this harden mean? Does it mean that God is forcing Pharaoh to do something against his will? Well, the word here can mean a twisting, like in braiding rope, twisting rope. Therefore, God is saying that what he's going to do is wring out of Pharaoh what is actually in his heart. What comes to my mind is a wet rag, like a washcloth, and the water's in there, but you wring it out. Pharaoh's true ideas are there, and his true feelings are there, but he's, of course, a politician, and God's going to force him to get past his plan, the political trick. Let's face it, he could have pretended to be a kind-hearted Pharaoh by granting permission to go. Sounds good, everybody's happy, but then recanting it later, which politicians do all the time. God instead is going to deny him such a political trick. He's not going to let him do that. He's going to make him show his true colors. Verse 5, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the sons of Israel from their midst. So Moses and Aaron did it, as the Lord commanded them. Thus they did. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. Okay, the Lord here is making it clear that he will be the one who delivers his people from Pharaoh, not Moses. Moses is just a tool in his hands. Pharaoh and the Egyptians will eventually come to recognize Jehovah as a supreme God over all other gods, even supreme God over everything. Right now, he's just one God among many to Pharaoh. And we also learn here that Aaron was now 83 and Moses is 80. Moses is the third child. He's the youngest. Now, Miriam, who's not mentioned here, was the oldest sibling. Verse 8. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when Pharaoh speaks to you, saying, work a miracle, then you shall say to Aaron, take your staff, throw it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent. So here Aaron serves as Moses' prophet, and Moses is serving in place of Elohim. Now, a prophet is the opposite of a priest. So what's the difference? A prophet is a representative from God to the people. In this case, people being Pharaoh. A priest represents the people before God. The high priest would go into the Holy of Holies once a year. Okay, what we have here, it sounds to me like Pharaoh is a bit bored. And so here these two troublemakers show up, and Pharaoh says to them probably a little beginning hellos and all the nonsense that happens when you greet a king. And then he says, looking at him, said, well, perform a miracle for me. Show me what you got. Okay. So Pharaoh challenged him to do that. So Moses then turns to Aaron, who's holding Moses' rod, to throw down the rod, which is Aaron's credential. That's his kind of like his pass card, or like you have pinned on you when you go into a certain place, like and you going into a school, you have to get from the office a pin that has a visitor on it, and you can walk around the school. Okay, that means you've been vetted out. And so, okay, the rod becomes a tannin. Now, this is interesting. All I've ever heard was that it turned into a serpent, but there's a problem with that. That's a word there. Tannin is never used anywhere else in the Bible for serpent. This word actually means in other places crocodile, just generic monster, or possibly dragon. Tannin is also used for the great fish or whale or whatever that critter was that swallowed Jonah, and is part of the description also of Leviathan in the book of Job. Leviathan and that whale are not serpents. The word for serpents, they have three words, and I didn't find anywhere to distinguish what they are. One probably is meaning a poisonous type, and maybe another word means those that you don't worry about. They're not poisonous, and I don't know. But anyway, there is Zakal, Saraf, or Nakash. Those are used in referring to serpents. Now, as the Egyptians worshipped Sebek, which was an evil crocodile-headed god, and you see the little picture there. You see that guy, lovely little crocodile face there. This was an attack on a powerful Egyptian god. Okay, now there's an alternate view to this. This argues that Aaron's rod did turn into a snake, and that this was an attack on Pharaoh himself, since the pharaohs wore an image of a cobra mounted on a headband. This view ignores the fact that tannin doesn't in any other place in Scripture refer to snakes, or even in extra-biblical Levitical and other writings, priestly writings and so forth. When they use tannin, they're meaning something besides a snake. Now, notice Pharaoh there. That's part of a sarcophagus we're looking at. And the thing on the right above his eyes is a hooded cobra. The thing to the left is a vulture. Imagine wearing the head, made out of gold, of course, shaped like a vulture. That also tells you one of their other gods was a vulture. That's a lovely religion they had. So now, here's some more thoughts that I have about the crocodile. Let me move to tell you what. We'll go on to the next slide and we can continue this. Verse 10. So Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh, and thus they did just as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a tannin. I'm going to use that word. It says serpent in English here, but I'm going to use tannin, whatever a tannin is. Then Pharaoh also called for the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same with their secret arts. For each one threw down his staff, and they turned into tannin. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Okay. Yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to him, just as the Lord had said. Now, the Egyptian priests throw down their rods, which they also turn into tannin, but Aaron's tannin eats up their tannin. Now, I'm a zoologist, as some of you know, and I have some background in herpetology. It makes much more sense to me if a tannin meant something besides serpent, like one snake eating another. And I've seen this. It takes a long time because snakes are long and it takes a while for them to work themselves over. You ever seen that on Discovery Channel on Animal Planet? It takes a long time. However, if Aaron's tannin was a small crocodile, it couldn't be bigger than the staff it came from. That it was, in other words, a year or two old. That it was larger than those of the priests who had small tannin. A middle-sized crocodile, say about an arm's length long, eating up baby ones or smaller ones, would be relatively quick. I can't imagine Moses, Aaron, and the priests and Pharaoh standing around for an hour or two watching snakes being eaten by another snake. They'd have all got bored and everybody had gone home. It just doesn't sit with me that way. Okay. And by the way, as we see here, just as the Lord had said, Pharaoh is still not impressed. Verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn. He refuses to let people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he's going out to the water, and station yourself to meet him on the bank of the Nile. And you shall take in your hand the staff that was turned into a serpent, a tannin. You shall say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But behold, you have not listened until now. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the water that is in the Nile with the staff that is in my hand, and it will be turned to blood. The fish that are in the Nile will die, and the Nile will become foul, and the Egyptians will find difficulty in drinking water from the Nile. Wow. Here's the second miraculous attack and a type of plague. The first one was more of just a demonstration with whatever tannin are. Okay, Jehovah now tells Moses to meet with Pharaoh the next morning while he's at the Nile River. As you can see, it's probably that each morning the Pharaoh went down to the Nile to bathe, which is why the daughter of Pharaoh, 80 years before, had gone down to the Nile with her handmaidens to bathe in the Nile, which they considered very clean and pure. And of course, they had it guarded so there wouldn't be real crocodiles around to interfere. And so they had a habit of doing that. And that's how Moses, when he was floating in the little ark, was found. So Pharaoh probably does something like this also, and maybe worships at the Nile and all that. Anyway, this time Moses is to tell Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the Israelites go, and that means Aaron here. Aaron's the prophet. Moses, as in standing in place of God, isn't going to touch and do things himself. It's his prophet does things. So that's kind of the imagery here. That's something that Pharaoh would understand. He's going to strike the Nile with the rod, and he's going to turn it into blood. Okay, so we see why Aaron's involved here. And this is accentuating that Moses represents Jehovah as a God, and the word God there is Elohim, so that Pharaoh is to look at Moses in the way that he would another God, lowercase g, in his sense, and Aaron is his prophet. So, okay, the engagement here is a contest between Moses, representing God, and Pharaoh, supposedly also a God. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. This actually indicates it's a contest between Jehovah and Pharaoh. And the outcome will show Pharaoh that Jehovah is more powerful than any Egyptian god. The word blood here is used in other places, and it can be translated as blood-like or like blood. And it is used that way in some other verses in the Bible. It could have been literal blood, or it could have been a form of like red tide, which I, as growing up as native of Florida, I've seen. One experience with red tide is more than enough, because tens of thousands, even millions of fish die and they get washed up on the beach. And then if you're unlucky to have a wind off the water onto the land, then basically, if you know what dead fish smell like, imagine an entire county stinking like that. It is awful. It is terrible. And it just ruins tourism. So anyway, red tide is called, down there, everybody in Florida got to know this. Sound like we're talking about some guy, but it's Jim Brevy. And that was a joke, because Jim Brevy was actually the name of the little one-celled organism that was, when they have a bloom where they have so much nutrients in the water, they start to multiply like crazy, and it actually turns the water kind of brownish, orangey red. And it creates a poison that can kill fish and actually sicken people. And so, but Jim Brevy is actually Gymnodinium brevi, the name of a one-celled organism. So anyway, you've received more biology there than you probably wanted. Verse 19, then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your staff, stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, over their streams, and over their pools, and over all their reservoirs of water, that they may become blood. And there will be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So Moses and Aaron did even as the Lord had commanded. He lifted up the staff and struck the water that was in the Nile, in the sight of Pharaoh, in the sight of his servants. And all the water that was in the Nile was turned to blood. The fish that were in the Nile died, and the Nile became foul, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. And the blood was throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Then Pharaoh turned and went into his house with no concern even for this. So all the Egyptians dug around the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the Nile. And 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. Now, the magicians appeared to perform the same thing with turning water into blood, but it's not clear just what water they worked on. since God had already turned all the water into blood. Somehow they must have had maybe a skin of water or something they poured out. And of course, if God was involved, he turned everything to blood, it would have come out blood. And they say, see, we're doing it too. And maybe they weren't doing anything at all. It was taking credit for what God was doing. It also hit all the canals and ponds and even the water in the water pots. So they had nowhere to go. The only clean water they could get was by digging into the ground, like in the sand. You may have ever visited the beach or had kids or grandkids do this. They can dig down near the water and dig down a hole, and next thing they know, the bottom of the hole is filling with water because it's filtering through the sand. So that's what they would do. It was clean because of filtering effect. They had to find water since this miracle lasted 7 days, and people can't go without any water at all to drink. And especially if you're living in a desert like Egypt. So they would have died if they hadn't been able to find any water. Now, it's interesting to me, if it had been genuine blood, and God could do that, of course, they could not have filtered it and would have died of thirst over the 7 days that this plague lasted. Blood cells are not going to filter out just through sand. They're far too small for that, and they go around in between the grains of sand, whereas the Gymbrevy organism and such would be hung up in the sand. The Gymbrevy organism is much, much bigger than a little red blood cell. So all the fish died and they fouled up the Nile. Can you imagine what that must have smelled like? Their river that they worship, the amazing, wonderful Nile, that was a stinking blah. Okay, and as before, what do we see? Pharaoh is still not moved to change his mind. He is a really stubborn dude. Since he had servants to dig water for him, he wasn't bothered except for the stinking of the Nile, and he just went in his house and just sulked, I suppose. Okay, let's have a look at an overview of all 10 miraculous plagues. This gives us a foundation as we move forward. We've already seen some plagues already. The use of plagues in the beginning is a bit of a stretch, turning staffs into tannin, whatever tannin are. I wouldn't call it a plague. It's a trick and the other things that were going on. So we'll just look at these real plagues that are coming. What's happening now? Now the turning of the Nile to blood or some blood-like stuff was certainly there. Let's take a look. Okay, they're not random. These weren't just random things. They were attacking 10 different Egyptian deities, ending with the defeat of the most powerful one. It was kind of starting at the lower end and working through to the top. The first 9, as you see on the screen, were warnings to Pharaoh and the Egyptians about what would happen if the Israelites weren't released. The last one was a judgment upon both Pharaoh himself and all of the Egyptians. And they have a specific pattern. Now, it's interesting. The first 3 plagues also included the Israelites. They were involved as well. And it showed everybody that the Lord was going into action. But after this, the Lord shifts and it gets focused on the Egyptians and whatever other peoples beside the Israelites were there. And the Israelites were now, from now on, being protected. Okay, the first 9 are set into 3 sets of 3. You have 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then 7, 8, 9. And the first 2 plagues in each were announced by Moses and Aaron. That would be 1 and 2, 4 and 5, and 7 and 8. The third in each, numbers 3, 6, and 9, was unannounced. It was a direct action taken by Jehovah. So we see there's a distinct pattern here. The first 3 plagues involved all of Egypt, including everybody in it, Egyptians, Hebrews, and everybody else who happened to be there. The second 2 of 3 focused only on Egypt and the Israelites, as I said earlier. Okay, this really made the actions of Jehovah stand out, showing that the Israelites truly belonged to him. He could hit the Egyptians and at the same time protect the Israelites. The first, the 4th, and the 7th plagues were announced to Pharaoh in the morning. The 9 warning plagues employed naturally occurring phenomena that were miraculous in their timing and extent. The actions weren't miraculous all by themselves. I mean, they've happened, some various things that you, as we read going forward, they've happened here and there, hail falling and the sky turning black and all the other stuff. But what was miraculous is that they were happening right when Moses would command them to happen. That is not natural. But they were, God was here using natural types of events that people, meaning people on earth, have been familiar with. Okay, but this last one, the number 10, that was the worst one, the one that finally decided for Pharaoh and the Egyptians to not only let the Israelites go, but they basically kicked them out and gave them all kinds of bribes to make them go and stay away, as we'll read once we get there. It was a plague of judgment, and it didn't use any natural phenomenon. The idea of the firstborn only in families all over, killing over and dying, and second and third sons and fourth sons and everybody else just not touched at all. That is not a natural event, and by any means. So we want to see this as this is kind of our foundations. We're moving forward. We're going to kind of go through these now and hit these and look at details and see how God is showing who he is in each one of these. So, okay, I hope you have a great rest of the week.